Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this second edition of DiPSCo's Reproducibility. My name is Vivian, and I'm honored to host this event with my colleague Miren today. So today, we're here to discuss the paradigm shift towards open science, transparency, collaboration, and accessibility in science, which is also the mission of our Department of Psychology and Cognitive Sciences here at the University of Trento.
As Vivian said, my name is Miren, and I'm very excited to launch our second edition of Reproducibility. As many of you may know, we are the first Italian journal club within the Reproducibility Network, focused on the promotion of open science. This local initiative within a global community is dedicated to fostering open discussions on topics related to open science, questionable research practices, old and new methodologies, and representation in science.
That's right, Miren, and we're pleased to announce that our weekly seminars are open to everyone, including students, researchers, and the general public. So the seminars will consist of two parts. A first is a 20-minute presentation. The second is a 30-minute interactive discussion open to the participants.
All right, so to kick off our first seminar today, we have our colleagues Paolo Guandalini and Simona Noviello, PhD students at DiPSCo at the University of Trento. The floor is yours.
Okay, hi everybody. We are Simona Noviello and Paolo Guandalini, and we are PhD students of University of Trento. Today, we are gonna talk about reproducibility with a paper in manifesto for reproducible science. But first of all, I'd like to ask you some questions. So, do you think there is a reproducibility crisis? Are you worried about not being able to reproduce a literature results? Raise your hands or just think about it. Okay, so let's see if you're right to be worried and if there is such a need, really such a need for this initiative. These are data from the literature. What maybe you may not be aware of is that the 85% of biomedical research efforts are going to waste every year. Around 90% of researchers think that there is a reproducibility crisis. In fact, more than 70% of researchers report to have had problems in replicating other scientists' research. And also, more than a half of them have had the problem to replicate their own studies. So the scenario seems really worrisome. And also bigger to what we would expect from what we have studied during our studies career. This is that's because during regular classes, this topic is not really covered. So what we want to do today is to present this problem from the very beginning. And that's why we choose a manifesto for reproducible science. This paper, in fact, is a good introduction to all the problems that research is facing right now in this period, and also a good starting point for the possibilities of solutions that we can implement to overcome this crisis. So let's start from the problems. As you can see, for each step of the scientific progress, there could be some problems and threats to reproducible science. Maybe what you are not really aware of is how easy it is to run in this kind of problems. For example, during that analysis, a researcher could be led to accept results that are in line with their expectation and reject data results that do not so for a confirmation bias. Okay, so there is a problem with the recognition of this kind of problem, and we want to talk about them. Today, so we are trying to discuss the problem, the threats, and the solution regarding methods, reporting and dissemination, reproducibility, evaluation, and the incentives. So let's start from methods and what we can do when performing a research. Okay, one of the most difficult problems to recognize during a research are cognitive bias. What I want you to consider when you think about researching is that cognitive science arises precisely from the desire of the researcher to do a great job, to discover something new, to contribute to the progress of science. For example, we have apophenia. This is the tendency to see pattern in random data. So the experimenters are willing to discover something new until they finish to believe in something that doesn't really exist in reality. Also, as I have already said some moments ago, confirmation bias is the tendency to focus on results that are in line with our expectation. Finally, also we have a hindsight bias, that is the tendency to see an event as having been predictable only after it has been occurring. So the experimenter somehow believes that they were right from the very beginning. Now, a very easy solution to this kind of problem is blinding. Blinding, as you know probably, is a practice where some of the people involved in a research, like for example participants, but also data analysis, data collector, are prevented from knowing some information about the research. For example, the experimental condition or the research hypothesis. This is because this kind of information can affect the performance of the participants or the decision of the data collectors and data analysis, and so in the end can result in biased data. In this context, pre-registration is also somehow a form of blinding. That's because when you pre-register a study, you write down the study design and the results when the data, the expected results, when the data are not known yet. So somehow you are blind of the results. Sorry, just a second. Okay. Okay, let's move to something that probably you think when you think about methods. As you can already know, when it comes to the statistical part, there are many errors and misperception that can affect a research. But when you have a misperception on something like p-value, the null hypothesis significance test, and so on, these kind of problems can also influence the reproducibility of a studies. So in these cases, something useful that can help to improve the statistical competencies and skills of a researcher is training for future researchers, but also a continuous education for actual researchers. As maybe you have already considered during your PhD, something very useful would be the development of resources that can be easy to digest and immediately also applicable to the research. In these slides, you can find on the bottom part some useful link and reference to know more about what we are going to discuss today. Okay, let's move on a completely different argument. Maybe some of you knows or not that in our world exists something called the conflict of interest. But something like this exists also in research. Let's take, for example, let's think about a sponsor or a clinical trial that also provide the drug that that the researchers are going to test. In this case, the sponsor will for sure have some interest in the research and could, in some way, intentionally or not, influence the research and for its own benefit and somehow affecting the accuracy of the research. But there are also other kind of conflict of interest, non-financial conflict of interest. Let's think about a researcher that have the interest to publish their research. In this case, the only way to overcome this kind of problem are the involvement of external methodologies and committees that can provide somehow a supervision, an external and objective supervision of the work. An example could be the Cure Huntington Disease Initiative. This foundation rely on independent statistical standing committee. This committee oversight the research plan, the design, the analysis, and so on. And critically, the members of this committee are not engaging in the research, in the Huntington research, and they have not investment in the results. Finally, for what concerns methods, I want to spend some last words on another serious problem of research, low statistical power. As you already know for sure, power is the ability, the probability to reject the new hypothesis when it's not correct. So basically to do the right choice. But power can be also affected by many variables like sample size. What we know for sure is that low statistical power can raise the likelihood to obtain both false positive results and false negative results, affecting the quality of the research. Despite this, we also know that low-powered design persists, also because of dysfunctional incentive system that will be also discussed by my colleague later. In this case, what we can do is combine our efforts in team science collaboration. For example, we have a pipeline project, the many labs, but also in the educational field, we have the collaborative replication education project. All these projects trying somehow to combine their efforts in attempt to do large-scale replication studies that can help us with the low statistical power, but also can help in improving the generalization of data and enhancement of standardization between different studies, in the optimization of transparency, and also provide us with a multiple perspective and protection from cognitive bias. So this is what we have to say about methods, the problem, and the solution in this section. Now I will give the floor to my colleague Paolo, that will start from now. So thank you for your attention.
Again, hi everyone, my name is Paolo Guandalini, and I will cover the remaining parts of the article. So maybe Simona, we can proceed with the slides. Thank you very much. And we will start by the reporting and dissemination part. So, okay. In our PhD cohort, we already had some class about pre-registration, so probably something already known to most of us, but I think that it might be useful to remember why pre-registration is so important. So as Simona was saying a few moments before, pre-registration is really useful because it helps us tackle two main issues in doing research. So the first one is the publication bias, and the second one is the analytical flexibility, also known as the outcome switching. So when we talk about publication bias, we refer to the fact that many more studies are conducted than published, and so there is a whole lot of research that we don't know about, and this gap has to do with the fact that scientific journals they tend to favor results that are positive, novel, and very clear. And the consequence of publication bias is the fact that the published literature indicates stronger evidence for findings than exist in reality. I'm sorry for the noise. On the other hand, when we talk about analytical flexibility, we refer to the fact that many researchers, consciously or unconsciously, tend to change the outcomes of interest depending on the observed results in their research. So the consequence of outcome switching is that we can see an increase in the likelihood that reported results are spurious or false, with the fact that a lot of negative evidence gets ignored, and also to issues like the p-hacking that Simona was mentioning before. So pre-registration is a great way to tackle these issues I was saying before. And why is like that? Because pre-specifying the study design and also specifying the primary outcomes and the analysis pattern in advance is a great way to make your decision as a researcher data independent, and so to make your research also more scientific and trustworthy. So the good news is that we have a lot of websites where we can pre-register our study. Like, for example, we put here the Center for Open Science or the Has Predicted, that are being used by many more and more research every day. Okay, thank you, Simona. And moving to the other part, the improvements of the quality of reporting. So pre-registration really helps to boost your discoverability of your research. So it makes your research more discoverable and more scientists can look at it. But on the other hand, it does not guarantee the usability of it. So improving the quality of reporting has to do with the transparency that you put in your work when you want to report what you've done. And it also has to do with how you are able to evaluate what was done during the research process and how you are able to justify the steps that you've taken during your research. So obviously, there are many tools we can use, and one of them, probably the best one, are guidelines. And it's true that many times as a researcher, we tend to see these kind of guidelines, for example, the one for the ethical committee, as a bureaucratic burden. So something that we must do, and it's really heavy on us. But if you can flip the perspective, we can see that these kind of guidelines are a great way to improve your research, because they help you to put a structure and to make clear everything that you want to do as a researcher. And also, those guidelines are essential because they make it possible to study behaviors and bad habits, like the one we've been talking about, that otherwise would be simply unknowable. So we couldn't have like a clear glance at the state of research worldwide. So even if we are aware of all these problems, the general situation is not that great, I would say. And I put here an article by Franco, which reports that almost 40% of all the published reports, they fail to mention one or two of the experimental condition, and almost 70% of those published reports, they fail to mention one or more of the outcomes, and the excluded outcomes are negative results or are associated with, for example, a smaller effect size. So the situation is quite gloomy, and we have a long way to go. Okay, thank you, Simona. Okay, so moving to the next part, which is reproducibility, I would say that coming from a different academic background, I was quite shocked at the beginning seeing the expression open science. And why is like that? Because it seemed to me quite redundant in a way. And I thought that maybe it was useful to remind us all what open science means. So when we say open science, we mean the process of making the content and the process of producing evidence and claims transparent and accessible. And obviously, it's something that we all would want in our scientific work, but we also know that there is a great lack of openness. So it's a really big issue, and we don't have time to cover it all, but just to state a few important points, we know that this lack of openness in the research, in the scientific world, is due to copyright issues, with intellectual property issues, and also with the fact that there is no public repository of the, of the research, all the research that is conducted nowadays. And it's a really complicated matter because there are obviously legit financial interests for researchers, and also there are very few incentives for researchers to pursue open practices. And we are going to talk about these incentives in a moment. Okay, thank you, Simona. But before talking about incentives, I'd like to spend some words about evaluation and a great opportunity that the authors of the article we are presenting today are mentioning. So in this part of the article, it's quite interesting because the authors explain the difference between evaluation and dissemination and how those two function were traditionally covered by scientific journals. So obviously, scientific journals have the reviewers that tend to evaluate the goodness of research, and they also do the dissemination part, so making the research known worldwide. But the events of internet had changed almost everything. So the dissemination nowadays through internet is a lot easier and a lot more powerful for researchers. So it leads to a question: what should be the role of publishers nowadays? So should they be more like gatekeepers, or should they be like more evaluators? So according to the authors, we should take best of both worlds. So we should still use the power that scientific journals have as evaluators, but at the same time, we should use internet to the fullest, to the full capacity that it can display. What does it mean? So there are already existing preprint services online where you can get comments on your manuscripts from other researchers, or there are other websites where you can get pre and post publication peer review on those websites. For example, we put here the PsyArXiv, I hope it's correct. So it's a great way to also rethink the way that we understand the way that the researcher can get some reputation. If we can move to the next slide, Simona. Okay, great. So what do the authors of the article propose? So internet really can offer some new opportunities for researchers and reviewers to get credits and reputation through doing the review work. So in the conventional, let's say, traditional model, reviewers, work as private, anonymous, and they do this kind of service, actually purely as a service, so they don't get paid for it. On the other end, if we want to implement the possibilities, the opportunities that internet offers, we could think a new system, a public commenting system, where a reviewer that chooses to make his or her identity known may gain or lose reputation based on the quality of the review that he puts online. And this leads to the last part of the article, which is super interesting. It is about incentive. So, okay, Simona? Okay, so in the last part of the article, the author, well, they don't offer a clear solution for a huge problem, but they point the problem, which is also really useful. So in the last part, they state that a coordinated effort, a collective effort is needed in order to tackle the reproducibility crisis issue that we are living into. So to really understand the reproducibility crisis, we have to look at the root of the problem. As a first instance, we should state that publication, and we all know that, are the academic currency. So if you're a researcher and you want to climb up your way in the academy, then you have to publicate, and hopefully in a really prestigious journal. And as we said before, scientific journals, they tend to favor positive, original, clear results. And they do that at the cost of accuracy and at the cost of creating more false positives. So as the problem is so big, so complicated, and a lot of stakeholders are into this issue, the solution must take into consideration that all the stakeholders are needed in order to create new cultural norms that might overcome the dysfunctional incentives that we have nowadays. So for example, and this is the main proposal of the authors of the article, we should put new incentives for rigorous research, for transparent research, and for reproducible research. And if we put value on that kind of aspects of research, then we can expect researchers to give attention to those aspects. And so in a way, we can better the quality of the research produced nowadays. Okay. We are at the very end of our presentation, so thank you so much for your attention. We just put here some takeaway points in order to sum up everything we've said so far. So we wanted to really have some three main points. The first one is that the publication mechanisms greatly impact the quality of research. On the second hand, we should create such conditions so that what is good for the scientists is also good for science. And third, the thing I was saying a moment before, a collective effort is needed to overcome the crisis. So there is no single agent solution. There is really a collective solution is needed here. Okay, thank you very much.